Right.
Hey, welcome folks to another episode of the Rich Life Podcast. This is Po Wu. I'm here with Lane. Today, for our topic, we're going to talk about this story that some of you might have heard, and it is the story about the two wolves within. Okay, so there's an old story. It's often attributed to the Cherokee or other Native American traditions that's made its way through campfires, classrooms, and coaching circles alike. And it's the story of the two wolves. And while it might only take a minute to tell, the lessons it carries are important, and I think it's something that's definitely worth talking about, especially for those of us who are trying to navigate all the complexities of modern life. Mhm. So the story goes like this. There's an old Cherokee grandfather who is teaching his grandson about life. A fight is going on inside me, he said to the boy. It's a terrible fight, and it is between two wolves. One is evil. He is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, and ego. The other is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The same fight is going on inside you and inside every other person too. The grandson thought about it for a minute and then asked his grandfather, which wolf will win? And the old Cherokee simply replied, the one you feed. So this version that I just read is by far the most commonly told. It's simple, clear, and pretty immediately impactful. And as I think some of you might know, it's been used in countless motivational speeches, and it's often labeled as a Cherokee proverb. However,
I definitely think sure there's a Buddha version or Chinese version of this.
oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't heard the story, but it seems very similar to something happens in people's lives, typically bad, right? And if
Yeah.
you see it as a bad thing, you're obviously going to feel like crap, low motivation, low energy, lack of creativity is
Yeah.
typically a byproduct of that. And you're just going to go down a spiral. But if you see it as good and opportunity, I know you and I just talked about a kind of a difficult thing, in kind of your new business venture. That can be a good thing or bad thing, and feed the one or otherwise. And I've had this conversation with my coach. I used to get, and I still get emotional on things, and that it get me down. And I remember, I think this is why it's helpful working with a coach. I always remember him saying, if you've already admitted defeat, or that's the meaning you're going to give it, then you are going to screw yourself and do yourself a disservice. And then that's why I like this coach, because he gives me some tough love in there. And I'm like, you know what? F that. I don't want to, that's going to sound like make things harder for me. So I better not do that. But that's what this kind of reminds me of.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in this story, it talks to the power of focus and choice, right? When things happen, you have a choice. Does life happen to you or does it happen for you, right? You have a choice to decide which inner voice are you amplifying, right? Which habits, which thought patterns, and which emotions are you feeding? Yeah, all of us have a choice. It really comes down to if you feed your negative emotions, you're just going to keep amplifying that, right? It's just going to build on itself and eventually overwhelm you. Or you have a choice. Do you choose to see the opportunity in things? Do you choose to see the positive aspects or the opportunity? And then if you do, that is also going to be like a self-reinforcing thing.
There was a quote I heard out there. It's not what happens to you, it's what you do after. I
Mhm.
think it's Epictetus, I think, a quote, but
Mm.
it's, I had on Etsy, I had this photo or that quote
Yeah.
put on the wall. Cost me like 40 something bucks or $50, but it's funny how the world speaks to you, but I saw that quote come up and it aligns with here. I also happened to meet like another tech founder, multi-million-dollar net worth. He exited his company, and it was just during our conversation, he mentioned the same damn quote. Just
Mm.
after. Some people think that talking and saying these stoic philosophies is a lot of hokey. But you look at successful people who've been through struggle and have created great success or wealth for that matter. A lot of these practices are very consistent in them.
Yeah. I think it reminds me of that saying that success leaves clues, right? And there's certain commonalities that we see in very resilient and successful people. And a lot of it comes down to your thought patterns, right? Because adversity and hardship and struggle happens to all of us, right? But not all of us respond in the same way, right? Some of us are able to use it to propel ourselves forward. And for others, it's the opposite.
The problem there, if you've exited a multi-million dollar company, you've probably had to push through. You've obviously gotten lucky too, but you've probably had to face your two wolves, and you've probably found ways to wield yourself past the negative emotions to
Yeah.
success
Yeah.
one way or the other. It's hard, I think, listening to this on a podcast if you haven't had much success. You graduated college or high
Mhm.
school and you had been promoted a couple times, but not to downplay it. A lot of people can just play the safety game and get to that point. But to truly get to massive success, it takes a struggle. And I think that's what creates confidence in
Yeah.
that struggle. That not a lot of people, if you don't have it, it's hard to tap into that. And I think that's it. A lot of this may be words, but maybe it's just like faith coming from people who've been through things. Like that's why I take advice from people who've been through it. And a lot of times, maybe I'm wrong, but I look at net worth as an indicator of that.
Yeah. That's a good point.
I guess I can't say it works, but I know I am very confident talking about truths in the world. I think the opposite I can get behind that, and that is if something happens to you and you look at the negative of it, I know for a fact that is probably an unsuccessful person.
Yeah.
If you want to assure failure in anything, when little bumps come up in the road, put yourself on the negative.
In doing some research on this story, I actually came across a lesser variation of this tale that has a slightly different ending. Right? So in this version, at the end, when the grandson asks which wolf will win, the old Cherokee man replies, "If you feed them right, they both win. If I only feed the white wolf, the black one will hide in the dark, waiting for me when I'm not paying attention. He will leap out and get the attention he craves. But if I acknowledge him, he is happy, and the white wolf is happy too. We all have these wolves inside of us, and the trick is to care for both." Found that it's obviously an alternate ending, but this version gained popularity among therapists, like trauma coaches, and those working in psychology. So in this version, it speaks not just to the tension like between the good and evil inside of us, but rather to the integration of the parts of ourselves that we often try to deny. So in this alternate version of the story, it acknowledges that there's value in our shadow side, like the parts of us that are perhaps messy, uncomfortable, reactive, the parts that we might not be proud of, right? Parts that we might try to suppress, right? But it acknowledges that integration is about leadership of the whole self, right? Not like exiling the parts that we don't like.
I guess version one, the white wolf would be what I think of as like the Pollyanna approach, right? Always
Mm.
things that happen, you always take the high road, put a smile on, a fake smile on, just keep moving
Yeah,
forward.
yeah,
Maybe the black wolf for this version two is people have emotions, and sometimes those emotions could be anger, desperation, frustration,
yeah,
and sometimes that those feelings or motivations are good to tap into. Like, for example, like if your house is messy and you just get pissed off and you're like, use
Mhm.
that emotion to freaking clean up
Yeah,
for in the next
exactly.
hour. What it's talking about.
Exactly. I think it talks to why quote unquote negative emotions might not be so negative after all. Yeah, it makes us ask like what's the role of negative emotions, right? And what if negative emotions aren't all bad, right? So for example, like when we feel anger, if you think about it, and I think psychologists talk about this too, why is there this emotion of anger? What's the reason behind it, right? Why, evolutionary wise, like, why do we have these negative emotions, right? And so if you think about it, anger can actually be useful because, for example, it can signal that your boundaries are being violated, right? And it can actually spur you to take action. Right? When we feel envy, for example, it oftentimes reveals a hidden desire or an unacknowledged goal. So that could spur you to action, right?
Or we have a different belief in ourselves
Yeah.
because somebody has something we want and we have that inner self-worth that we deserve that.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Right. If you feel guilty, that is actually a sign that, hey, you know what? Maybe I need to do some moral reflection or some behavioral change. And arrogance, for example, might mask actually a deeper insecurity, right? So if we're actually aware of it, we can actually heal. Psychologists will oftentimes talk about the other side of negative emotions and approaching these negative emotions with curiosity instead of judgment. Because when we approach these negative emotions with curiosity, they can actually become teachers and not our enemies. It's not something that we should be ashamed of or suppress. And I think a lot of us understand that a lot of times when we try to suppress a negative emotion, that can be counterproductive, right? Oftentimes, like for example, if you try to suppress your anger, it'll just build up and come out in probably like a very inopportune time and actually cause some real damage.
In this case, say something unlucky happens and you tap into your anger,
Yeah.
and now it motivates you to write a great manuscript or a book or something. The only way we're going to get up that thing if you're like, I'm just going to push this car with anger over the hill,
Yeah.
that might be a positive usage for that.
Oh, totally. Yeah, totally. I think, yeah, it's my belief that for all of us, sometimes like we do want to tap into that like that dark wolf or like the dark energy because it can be really effective. Do we want to tap into that all the time? Probably not, because it can lead to burnout, right? But tap into the dark energy sometimes, tap into the light energy at other times, and yeah, you let the two wolves inside of you coexist in this balance, right? So in this version of the story, I feel like it's more in line with a lot of Eastern philosophies, right? There's this coexistence of yin and yang, right? Because like your yin can't exist without the yang and vice versa. And it's the balance between the two, the integration between the two that is behind the real strength.
Like this, there's a lot more nuance than the simple,
Yeah.
the Star Wars world. You have the dark side and the light side. You use it for good.
Yeah.
I'm a little split if you start to talk to your kids about this. You need a more of a mature
Yeah.
person, but I like this idea that you're bringing out because one time you tap into people's emotions. Sometimes people do things for ego, and I guess that would be, or vanity, that would be a somewhat of a emotion. Some people do things because they've been wronged in their past. I just went to a fundraising thing recently where it was on human trafficking. So
Mm,
you bet there's a lot of dark wolf type of energy there.
yeah.
And hopefully that can be channeled in a better way to motivate, to create communities, create value,
Yeah.
or just to get on the right track after such a difficult
Yeah.
past. But yeah, I think that's sometimes I've been aware of this. Like somewhere down the line, somebody told me not to, hey, if you get frustrated or pissed off on something, don't have that fuel you to
Mm,
go do something. And I always led into that, the first version of the story
yeah. Yeah.
on that.
Yeah. I think I found the second version more interesting. And I think I could be wrong, but for a lot of high achievers, this will resonate.
Let me ask you that, like,
Yeah.
maybe think of one or two like really hard achievements that you've went and did. What was the motivation at the end of the day? I would probably argue if you really got honest with yourself, it was because you're trying to prove yourself, and maybe that's coming more from a darker energy.
Sure.
Most people never come from abundance. I did this exercise. It's called Lifelines, where you put on your whole life on the spectrum of +1 to 5, -1 to
Yeah.
5. -5 would be like you've been harassed and horrible things happen to you.
Yeah.
It's a great way to tell people your story in a very vulnerable way. You look at the people who've achieved a lot, typically they have a lot of baggage. I see that correlation.
Oh, I agree. In my experience, I find that a lot of entrepreneurs have a history of something that led them to having a strong aversion to authority or control. Right? So something happened in the past, some sort of experience. For some, it's perhaps even traumatic, but that's what lit the fire under them to do what they're doing.
I work with a lot of high net worth, more second gen, first gen wealthy families. I'll tell you what typically does not work is give your kid a paid off $1.3 million rental and have them manage it. It's like giving them a tennis racket to go hit a ping pong. They can't miss.
Yeah.
Or very similar to a paid off triple net and have them go collect the rent check every single month.
Right.
Then does that create moments of negative where you get traction from it? Probably not. Hey, I guess it's tough to live with the silver spoon and the rent check coming in every month that your parents set up for you.
Yeah.
But I do see it on the other side. A lot of people born into that situation got different problems of self worth. They have this idea, people whispering around them that they're just the rich kid who got lucky. There is some potentially negative emotions that tap into on that side too. So just wasn't me.
Yeah, that's true. Another angle I think I found interesting, especially when thinking about the second version of the story, is the neuroscience angle. This is related to evolution, right? Why do we have these negative emotions, right? From a brain-based perspective, these uncomfortable emotions are definitely not glitches. In fact, they're evolutionary signals honed for our survival and adaptation. The part of the brain commonly associated with fear is the amygdala. The reason why that's helpful for us is that it helps to tag emotionally significant events, both positive and negative, so that our brains can prioritize attention and memory formation. When you feel an emotion like envy, anger, or guilt, your brain is saying, hey, this matters. There's either a potential threat or a big opportunity here. To dismiss these emotions outright, it can actually rob you of very valuable information and a very valuable opportunity.
And everybody's different. You can have an event that seems very impactful, but somebody may or may not have an emotional reaction. And also a small event that creates a big emotional reaction.
Yeah.
You and I go through, you may have a total emotional, like one thing, maybe you're super sad because that event reminded you of something you should have done. Or for me, that same event that happened in my life maybe creates a emotion of appreciation. I was so glad to have it. So you have various outputs on just the same event.
Yeah, and scientists have done work on this, and they revealed that emotions, like you alluded to, they're actually really essential to decision making. And they found that with people who have brain damage in emotional centers, for example, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, they can understand facts rationally, but they'll oftentimes struggle with basic decisions. So, in a nutshell, negative emotions help us to weigh risks, assess threats, and consider consequences. They push us towards correction, repair, or boundary setting. If we understand this, we'll actually see that negative emotions are not so negative after all. They're actually quite useful, especially if we tap into them instead of just dismissing them as something that we shouldn't feel. They've also done work looking at neuroplasticity and emotional suppression. Chronic suppression of emotion can lead to overactivation of our sympathetic nervous system, right? And this creates more stress and reactivity. It's actually counterproductive because our brains are more wired for hypervigilance and avoidance, which in turn limits our growth and adaptability.
Is this where the guy just snaps?
Yes. Yeah. So they've done research looking at it. So and I think a lot of us know this too, if we try to suppress certain things, like telling ourselves, don't be angry, don't be sad, be happy all the time, it oftentimes leads to the exact opposite outcome. You actually become more stressed, right? You can become hard on yourself for actually feeling these emotions, and it really holds us back, right? In contrast, if we actually can name and process these emotions, that is actually what allows our brains to rewire itself towards self-awareness and regulation.
Yeah. Or change your freaking situation.
Yeah.
To me, that's what I understand emotions to be, which is it signals that I'm getting from my environment that I need to make
Something
big
just,
or
yeah.
small changes. Yeah. And something you said there, right, your
Hmm.
body will eventually snap and react, and you'll go through adrenal fatigue
Hmm.
probably.
Yeah.
But I think what we're talking about more here is you just have a very, maybe you're constantly being socially bullied or something like that. I think maybe kids go through this more.
Yeah.
But I guess you see a lot of adults now, these mass shootings and things like that. That's probably a good example of something like this where
Yeah.
maybe they wield themselves one way and they suppress the stuff and then it just
You snap. Yeah.
snaps. Yeah.
What?
And it's probably why when everybody asks, why did they do it? And they're like, look at this guy's situation. Shitty. What a shitty situation. Because he never did anything about it.
Yeah. And that sort of speaks to the importance of being able to identify your emotions and You want to name your emotions if possible. This is something I learned from working with a psychologist. In fact, I might have mentioned this on previous podcasts, how I had a lot of difficulty with actually naming emotions.
I have the same problem on my thing. I got that
Emotion wheel, yeah.
with 9 or 12 things, but there's a higher level emotion with 30 something
Yeah.
emotion. That's too much for me. That's fine.
Yeah, they've done research looking at how helpful it is because labeling emotions activates a certain part of the brain, right? For neuroscience geeks, that's the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. That part helps to actually dampen your amygdala's threat response simply by naming the emotion. And this is a tactic some therapists will recommend. It's a process known as name it to tame it. Right? So just saying I feel resentment or I notice envy, for example, like that actually begins to shift your physiology and your awareness.
You and I do this when we do our relationship podcasts on like the Gottman Horseman, right? You're
Yeah.
supposed to name it to tame it.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe this is something I'm struggling with, right? Like, all right, I picked the emotion from this wheel. Am I supposed to then tap into it? And I guess that's where I'm having trouble. It's like, all right, if it is envy, then what? Or if it is frustration, then what? I get maybe that's half the battle, but that's where I'm loose, be honest. Because I think a lot for speaking for a lot of the listeners here, hopefully nobody's in a really bad situation. If they are, obviously go consult
Yeah.
medical. And the emotions are also very subtle. So that's what's it's a harder task for us. Obviously, if you had a crappy job, you're in and out of work, nobody likes you, no friends, probably have strong emotions and you would tap into it. And that would not only be a big motivator, but it would probably you do micro corrections. But I guess maybe that's help me out, Paul. Like where if I have this event happen and this subtle feeling, how do I find this through the darkened forest? What am I supposed to do with that? Tell me, wise one.
I'll just speak from like personal experience when I worked with a personal therapist. And I remember that when I was able to identify like a negative emotion, the therapist would have me think, okay, how can this emotion be helpful? In the moment, it's hard to identify, like you might need some help, right? Nowadays, you can perhaps have ChatGPT or AI help you. For example, you feel envy, right? Again, like that could represent that could be like your inner voice saying, "Hey, I want something, or there's a goal that I haven't achieved yet." You also mentioned like if you feel frustrated, that triggers I think the part of the brain that is associated with error detection, or perhaps conflict monitoring or goal pursuit. So I know if we think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, the frustration of emotion probably helps us to persist towards essential goals rather than giving up too early. Right? It can actually push us to problem solve, learn new strategies, or think about, hey, do we need to adapt our approach? So I think it's probably our brain's way of signaling, hey, there's a block goal or like an unmet expectation. Yeah, it's your brain saying, hey, this path that we're on, like, it's not working. Let's try another one.
Emotions
Yeah.
are signals if you're willing to decode them.
Yeah, yeah, and because it can be a frustration can be like a pretty strong emotion. So that we know that the stronger an emotion is, like that's what makes memories stick. So when something is strong, it's an emotion is strong, it's actually much more likely to actually spur us to take action, to do something different. Yeah.
And this is actually a pretty good use case for ChatGPT or
Mhm.
AI, assuming that they don't want to pay for a therapist.
Yeah.
Start off with this: what's the stimulus? What's the story? And then what was the emotion that you got from that story? And then you can prompt GPT to keep asking you questions to peel back the layers of the onion, maybe even 5 to 7 times. It's obviously the worst way you can do this. I'm just saying that for a
Yeah.
disclaimer there, using AI to help you psychoanalyze. But I don't know, it's a start, I think. So at least it prompts you, you're prompting it to prompt you questions.
Yeah, nowadays there's some psychology apps that utilize AI, and on the whole, it's a positive thing, right? Before seeing a therapist, it's actually kind of reach for a lot of people, or you might not
Yeah.
be able to, if you're in the moment and you're feeling like a negative emotion, you might not have somebody to be able to help you right away.
Yeah.
So,
Especially people with have decent lives, even maybe
mhm.
in great lives. These things that emotions are not, the signals and emotions are not very strong. But
Hmm.
you probably forget about it in 30 unless
Yeah.
you did it
Yeah.
right then and there.
Yeah. But yeah, I think a takeaway for our listeners is when you feel like a negative emotion, just gently acknowledge it. Don't beat yourself up too hard because it's your brain is actually trying to tell you something. Hey, for example, like for frustration, it's your brain saying, "Hey, something matters here. Keep going, but maybe try something different." And it's actually a powerful biological motivator designed to keep us from being stagnant, which ultimately is a good thing.
What's your take on decision? And this is an example that if you something happens and it always comes back to anger, how would you diagnose that? Or is it really always just anger? Or is it
Mm.
something else? Or what would you say? How might you break that down a little bit more?
Yeah, so anger, this is great. This is a great question. So again, anger can be a signal that like I think perhaps your boundaries are being violated. So I think in terms of like evolutionary function, it probably helped like our ancestors to be able to stand up to injustice, for example, like defend territory, protect your loved ones, or enforce social norms. I think in modern times, I think it plays like a similar role. Anger can prompt us to speak up, to protect boundaries, to challenge unfair treatment, or confront like what we feel is unjust and wrong. Right. So anger is not inherently bad. It's energy. I think it's your brain's way of saying, hey, this matters. Pay attention, take action. I think in the short term, like when we feel angry, we've obviously all felt angry, and oftentimes we'll feel like our heart start to race, right? And that's your body releasing adrenaline and cortisol, right? It's prepping your body to respond, like that, like fight or flight response. But obviously, it's not good if like your anger overwhelms you, right?
I'm
And
looking at my simplistic emotion wheel. Anger can mean mad,
yeah,
hurt, threaten, distant.
yeah, sounds right.
Great conversation today. Definitely think it's personally pertinent.
Yeah,
If you were like in an MMA fight, right, trying to beat somebody up is the goal, right? I think like certain emotions is people have their go-to, right? Like maybe anger is synonymous with the guillotine
hmm,
submission. I don't even know if that's a move. There are a lot of ways you can win, right? You can knock the guy out on the floor, on the ground. There's all these submission moves. Consider there are other emotions to tap into to achieve the goal, is my takeaway here.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And maybe with just simple things out there, simple tasks, simple projects, you can just backhand guillotine the guy
yeah,
or just tap into what comes more naturally.
yeah, yeah.
I think with bigger tasks, you may have to use more finesse.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I know. My guess is that you probably don't want to be living in anger for too long, even if you're an MMA fighter, because while you might be able to tap into that rage that can give you some extra power, when you see everything as like an immediate threat, then you are reducing blood flow to other parts of the brain, perhaps ones that can think more strategic and tactically. Right? So in that sense, you could actually be at a disadvantage if you're in a fight against another professional fighter, if you're actually purely residing in anger and you're not able to think strategically. Right.
Yeah, like the same strategy does not always work for different problems or
Um,
pathways.
right.
Better word.
Yeah. Anger is actually like a really interesting emotion because for a lot of people, it's actually like a learned emotional default. So, for example, if anger was modeled for you growing up, if you have an angry mom or dad, then you can grow up with your nervous system actually wiring it as a primary mode of emotional expression. And oftentimes it can be a stand-in for sadness and fear. And I think we see this in a lot more men than women. Like in society, anger sort of becomes like a socially acceptable stand-in for more vulnerable emotions like grief or shame. So anger, because
Yeah, everybody's doing backhand guillotines left there,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. And I think there's a lot of anger out there, especially as things get more and more crazy in the world. So yeah, this is definitely a topic for another podcast because this is a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially there's just a lot of chronic anger out there, but not all chronic anger is the same because oftentimes it represents like a lot more.
I guess the takeaway is if you're somebody who I was actually like this at one time. You always think, oh, positive mindset. No, there's different ways around it, and maybe being pissed off from time to time maybe gets you over the hump. But if anything, tap into the emotions and really have that internal dialogue on what are the signals it's giving you. But yeah, if we'll see you guys on the next podcast.